All right, we're trying this again at Limmer Education. My name is Dan Limmer, and we're here in this Facebook Live video talking to you, educators, about how to engage your students in the online classroom. Most people are about a week or so into the forced online classroom, some a little more, some a little less. I know that today people have started to come back to school and in some colleges. So now's a great time to talk about how to keep people engaged. Love to have you throw some comments in as we go here. And I'm going to give you some of my thoughts about this, both from a high-tech and a low-tech approach. I think we should start with low-tech. And I think that we should always use sound educational principles. Just because we're going into an online classroom doesn't mean that anything that we do changes from the concept of education as far as our head to our heart and how we deal with students. And I think our students need to feel a sense of consistency. Many of these students did not start with an online classroom, and coming in is going to be very challenging. I'm experiencing this myself, running an EMT and an AEMT class that were suddenly put online. There's something about the structure of coming into class twice a week, having lectures and labs that you can just come in. It's an automatic deadline. You're going to have a test on Tuesday. You're going to have a lab here, read this chapter. And you know that on Tuesdays and Thursdays or Mondays and Wednesdays that you've got a hard stop, that you're going to have to apply the material. You're going to have to take the test. It's going to happen. And that goes away when you're suddenly put into an online classroom. And just for the record, EMS educators are EMS people. Some of us have a attention span about as short as our students. We don't always like to admit that, but it happens. So the concept of consistency is very, very important, being there for your students. If you have a discussion board, you need to be there every day and make some comments. You need to facilitate. You need to ask some questions. When students log in, if they see that you have been there, they will come back because they know that it's important to you. Setting an example of the behavior that you want for your students in this online environment is very important. Leading by example. As an educator, leading your students to do the right thing is just really so important. And as we talk about high tech versus low tech, I have to tell you, I am still a fan, a significant fan of the discussion board. I just believe that the concept of something that's asynchronous, when you can come in and put down a thought or a message and then check back, matches so many other forms of our online communication. And if we put high quality questions in our discussion boards, things that aren't yes or no answers, things that can have opinions. I'll give you an example. In an AEMT class I'm teaching right now, I had a discussion where I said, here's 5 patients. I had a 16-year-old soccer player with a radius and ulnar fracture. I had an 86-year-old woman with weakness and a little shortness of breath. I had a trauma. I had a 2-year-old pediatric clinging to mom, and one other one that's escaping me right now. But what was the question? For an AEMT class, would you start an IV for these patients? Now think about that. We talk a lot about how to go and put the round peg in the round hole starting the IV, but what about the entry-level decisions, those decisions that give us confidence, that help form our practice, that give our students a sense not only of what to do in the field, but even priorities for the National Registry exam? And the best part about it is that people didn't answer the same. And I got to ask them why. Well, I'd started as a precaution, they said. I said, a precaution against what? Or how much did that precautionary IV cost? How does it affect how things work in healthcare when resources are limited? What do we do? Is there a risk of discomfort or infection for the patient? What if you miss the IV? So we get to bring up those things that make a difference, that they have to decide in the field, and it engages them. And show that it's okay to have different opinions. Things like that, I think, are very mature, and I think they're good. And you can have case studies in your discussions. You could just have definitions. I had some where I said, okay, wheezes, fine crackles, JVD, pedal edema, give me conditions that will have these things in them, or define what they are. If you could say, I'm sitting in class with my students right now, I'd be having this back and forth discussion, build it online. But the beauty of it is that you can do this anytime from anywhere. And don't forget, for example, in AEMT and paramedic classes where people have already been practicing as EMTs or AEMTs, when they're out there working, they're going to be working a lot because their coworkers are quarantined. They're going to be stressed. They're going to be worried about their families. And discussion board is the kind of thing that you can do as a hit and run when you can't otherwise require your students to always be there at 5 p.m. Thursday night or 9 a.m. Wednesday morning. Discussion boards, the asynchronous nature, we sometimes kind of look down the end of our nose at that. I'm actually a fan, and I think that we can do it, but we should match the message to the medium. So let's go a little bit more high tech. Let's say that you want to get your students some good information. In my last Facebook Live, I talked about some podcasts. Again, I'm a fan of Ginger Locke's Medic Mindset. Bill Young's got a 10-minute medic, awesome. Montgomery County Hospital District, Inside EMS. There are a ton of great blog posts out there. But you know what? You can put links for your students and they can listen to those. First, don't give them too many. Give them just enough. Students need to know what they're doing online is relevant. That's another way to engage them because they know they'll be tested. They know it'll be used in a discussion board. They need to know that these things are going on. So then you put up those, and I also mentioned Limmer Education has audios. I'm personally, you might not be surprised, using these in my classes right now. And I post a discussion board question about an audio source, whether it be Limmer's audios, whether it be Ginger Locke's or somebody else's. Listen to this audio and then go to this discussion. And I've used several so far. One of the ones I do is I say, list 3 things from the audio that you listen to that interest you, that will affect your practice, or that surprised you and that you would want to share with other people in the class. Now think about that. If students know they have to do that before they listen to the audio, they're going to listen to it, maybe even take notes. And then when you do that, not every student is going to pick the same 3 things, which takes the information from the podcast and it spins it around multiple times in your discussion boards. Well, then what do? As the educator, you go into the discussion board and say, hey, I like point number 2. What if you, and then you extrapolate it to something else, and then have other students chime in. Okay? Now, when you're doing the discussion board, remember that your students may be suddenly new to it. It's not like they started the class. They're going to need to know what to do. They're going to need to know it's okay to comment more than once, that you want them to comment more than once, that you can comment on other students' questions, or that they can comment on questions that you asked of another student. That the concept of that thing in class, I mean, picture sitting in class and you put a question out there and 3 students raise their hand. I want that in my discussion boards too. I want everyone to have something to say about something that's important. So I think you can even take that and link that to a higher tech kind of process. So look for those audios. Look for ways that you can take some of the heavy lifting from yourself. Let's say that you suddenly you found out a week ago or 2 weeks ago that you have to be online. You're not going to have time to create audiovisual resources for every single class that's coming up while you're doing all of the other things that's going on. That's why you need help with that heavy lifting. My Limmer Education audios, the podcasts I talk about. Listen to them, choose good ones, and then link them to other parts of your lesson. Take some of the heavy lifting off you. Right now, I'm putting up week by week in my online classes, trying to keep quality out there. I mean, I don't just want discussions, I want quality. And it takes time to create quality, right? Picture your online course. I put up a module. We use Canvas at Galveston College, and I put up a module. And I say, here's module, this is week number 10. I put the dates. And then I just put a page up and I say, overview, read this first. I outline all the assignments and all the things that are in there so you can kind of get a whole approach to it. Then I have discussions, and then I have a quiz. And at the end, they need to know they have to take a quiz. Now, we'll talk about testing as we get to the end of this live video. Students need a roadmap. They need to picture it. They need to know how it all comes together, and they need to know their expectations in the online classroom. If you really want them to engage fully, they have to know they should, they have to believe they can, and they have to understand why they do. All right, really, really important. So I think that, again, I think you can see some of my passion towards this in general, but why low tech is really okay. Now, let's say that you take one of those audios or one of those podcasts, and you have a couple audios that you want them to listen to. So one of them you may say, list 3 things about these, or maybe your topic is altered mental status and you have a couple different podcasts. Say, what did you learn from these 2 sources? Give me 3 things. But the other option is put up a case study. Find a case study that touches upon something that was in that podcast, or doesn't totally touch upon something in that podcast, but creates the ability to follow it through, to be able to think a little bit more, to have to research, to go out and do something a little bit extra to start making things come together and click. So the other discussions you can do based on these things are case studies, and they don't have to be, really long, crazy case studies. It was a dark and stormy night, and you don't have to do it. You've got this patient, and this is, and then come up with steps or alternatives or questions, based on that. And you want to make it so it's not ambiguous, so they can answer the question. Many times I will actually post a sample answer, right? I had one where I put up to a class, you have a guy at a supermarket, he's a little disoriented, it was an altered mental status discussion board. And I said, list 5 things that could be wrong with him, right? And it might be seizure, it might be a stroke, it might be a overdose, it might be alcohol, it might be a psychiatric condition, it could be anything, right? Syncope. And then tell me 3 things that you could check on scene that would tend to support that particular potential diagnosis. So it's a differential diagnosis exercise. But what did I do? I said, here's an example. And I picked a little bit more of an outlier. I said, if I believe that this was a heart rhythm problem that caused low perfusion that made him pass out, I would ask him if he had palpitations, if he had a cardiac history, if he had medication, and certain things. So I gave an example. And if you give an example in your discussions, it's going to help people know what to do. We sometimes as educators have trouble sitting there picturing the student at their keyboard, wondering if what they're going to say is going to be right, if they'll look silly in front of other people in the discussion boards, and if it's going to be in the right format. So let's help them along in that. How do we get them to engage, make them feel comfortable when it comes to engaging? So we've talked about consistency and being an example. Those parts of being an educator never change. The concept of being that availability. I've actually, a lot of times we don't give our phone numbers out, but since we're all so separate now, I said message me and we'll come up with a time to talk. Gave them my mobile number, I check email, and I'm there a lot. Students need to know you're there. If they see you there, they will be there. Our low-tech engagement discussion boards are good, and we bring in high-tech engagement, audios, podcasts. We haven't even talked about the wealth of information that's out there on YouTube. YouTube has videos from other educators, from manufacturers, from squads. I mean, it's crazy. It's ultimately the EMS search engine now if you want to find something out. If you're going to include or embed links into a platform that you have, I would say choose wisely. Again, much like the podcast, don't overdo it. Make sure it's relevant and make sure it's a very high quality, not only in the appearance of the video, but also in the content of the video. That it's not going to be painful, for the students to watch and be able to do that. Let me just check on Brian's comment here. All right, Brian Richling, I haven't had any trouble adapting to the online educating. My students made the switch with no issues and even appreciate the in-class lectures more due to my more animated style and can't replicate that on camera. Maybe it's best, Brian. However, I agree with that. Let's think about the message we send. Well, I really prefer to be in the classroom, but since I can't do it, I've got to do this online thing. I hope it doesn't suck. And you're not going to engage your students. This morning, I told my AEMT students, I don't know what your class was like before, because not only did we switch online, I took over from an existing educator. And the class seems good, up to this point. I haven't seen any issues, but not only did they switch to online, they switched educators. So I said to them, if I was teaching your class, I might actually do it this way anyway, right? Here's the totality of the class. You read your chapters, you listen to the audios that I've assigned, you do your discussion board questions, you reach out to me if you have, go back to the discussion boards 2-3 times a week at least. Then you're going to take a quiz at the end. And then the week after, on Monday morning, we meet online for 2 or 2.5 hours, and I go over everything. I actually think that might be better than the traditional classroom. I mean, really, I think that Brian's point is really valid, that the concept of going online is not necessarily a burden. In a blog post I did at limmereducation.com, I said, this is going to change the way that we are teaching in the classes going on from here. Now, our summer classes starting in May and June, I suspect we're going to have a significant part of these classes being online, and we're still going to be trying to catch up with clinicals from our spring semester. So what we're doing now is an investment for the future, but I also predict that if all of a sudden we get, okay, all clear, everything's good, no more virus, nothing else, we might say, I might be able to get more students. I might be able to get more people from fire departments to work weird shifts if I do more stuff online and keep my class meetings either online or smaller but more valid. I agree. I think we may actually be doing better. We may be forced out of our comfort zone into doing something, and our students and ourselves may like it. Now, not all students are going to jump into this. It might not be their preference. We have to lead. We have to lead by example. I think a positive message is important. But we will have students who will struggle with this. We're going to have students who will have their challenges. They prefer things handed to them. They might not necessarily be great readers. They might not have the inside drive to go out and say, I tell my students, I will teach you, but you have to learn. I say that in a traditional class. Now the learning is even more. The onus is more on them to be able to learn. So, in that, I don't think it's going to be easy for everyone. I think there's people that if they knew that this was going to go online, they might have said, maybe I'll wait until the virus is over. And we have to be able to deal, with those people as well. Hi, Lara. It's good to big Texas contingent here. It's great to see you all. Wish I was there. Yes, we're crazy if we go back to the way we were doing it just because it's what we've always done. I think that it is a really big opportunity. Christine is very kind that my students are lucky to have me step in. And thanks for doing these things. Thank you all for coming to these. And I've been told that I talk too much, so it's probably time to wind down. I haven't got the hook yet. However, let me leave you with one of my last thoughts, is that you still have to test people. Don't forget, just because you're online, the motivation that testing provides, right? Test them like you would test them in class. Now, we had a great discussion in a different educators group actually out of Texas after my last live webinar. And we're very, very concerned about exam security, right? I get that. But I'm not sure, for me, that's not the point. For me, if I have an exam that I want to use next semester and the semester after, well, there certainly are security issues. But I think the real issue is that I want students to be able to learn. And I think testing will make them learn. And if I give them a test and they have to look up some of the answers they've learned, I do think sometimes we have to try and figure out what the end result is here, and do that. We have to make sure they're going to pass the National Registry, that they've met our objectives. Tests are there for that too, but there's a lot of ways to do it. I've had a lot of comments here, but I would love to see if anybody has any last thoughts about anything that I've said, anything that you're doing right now that you'd like to share. I certainly am not the only source in this as it goes. So So I think that the testing element is really, really important. Whether you do the testing really just to get them into the books and make sure they know it, you also, when you're testing online, do you want them to have a time to test? Do you want them to have a test they can only take once, or can they do multiple attempts at the test? There are different security programs out there as far as how this can be done using the computer camera that can be turned on during the exam. The FISDAP exam program for the unit exams and final exams for security has recommended a couple different programs. I do believe that there is something to be said for security, but I think there's also to be said something for learning, and our students are in a kind of a uncharted territory for many, and I think that's it. Now, like I said, please, any comments you have, keep it going. The last thing I'll say, I want to talk about skills briefly, and I'm not convinced that we can take all our skills and put them online. There's some pretty innovative stuff being done out there. But I think that what we want to do is, I think we're trying to take I like the word, I like thinking about the long view, right? What's the long view in this? Where are our students going to be as far as clinicals go? How much more will they need to do? If we get them back, can we do a 1 or 2 day boot camp and get our students through skills? My thought right now, and what I'm going to do in my classes, is I am going to employ Flipgrid, Flipgrid, Flipgrid. And I signed up for an account, and I'm getting my students signed up. And in the next couple of days, I'm going to lay my 14-year-old daughter on the floor. She does not know this yet. If she's watching, Margot, you'll be the patient. And in doing this, I'm going to either set a camera up or have somebody record me doing a head-to-toe trauma assessment. I'm going to put it up and I'm going to say, here's the scenario. I want you all, by the due date next week, to record your own trauma scenario. I want you to record an assessment. I want a size up, I want a primary, I want a secondary, I want you to talk about some of the decisions you make in between. I'm going to put one up, which I believe will be an example. Do I believe it'll be perfect? No. And I think we have to recognize that that's okay, right? We have to recognize that my role isn't so much to be perfect in this, it's to be good, it's to be human, to be a good example. But part of this is, right? Now, we already know that some of our current things, we have our students perform a skill. But we realize now that there's a value for other students watching and evaluating a skill, that there's learning there. And I think that's what Flipgrid's going to do for me. I can't, get angios out to my AEMT class and say, hey, start an IV on your sister. But you know what? For assessment and for critical thinking, how about history taking, right? If somebody lives at home with their grandparents and they're all, socially, personally distanced together, they're all stuck at home, and interview about medical problems as long as they're comfortable. Do a medical history and put it up. That this experience, I think, if it doesn't solve our problem, it can at least keep the flame lit, that when we do get them back into our labs, when we can do the things we want to do, it won't be like we're teaching people all over again. Let me just look at a couple of comments they did come in here. Holy cow. Kim, I appreciate your stance on testing. Allowing them to look things up can be beneficial. It's better than having them just guess. I think it is. What I would say to do is, if I give my students an open book test, I generally weight it less towards their overall average. I think I'm somewhat hesitant about taking an open book test person and say they got a 95 average and I'm going to send them out to practice in the National Registry when they haven't really done it without that. I think that there's room for all kinds of testing. But being forced online, having limited options, let's make it a good experience. Thank you. I think that makes sense. Lara is using a website called Quizzes, Quizizz. It's like Kahoot, but you can assign it for homework. Kahoot's a great program. One of the issues I've had with Kahoot is that when I try and put a scenario in, I don't have enough characters, to do that. So you end up doing more recall questions or short scenarios. I'd be very curious to see if Quizzes gives you more room to put a bigger stem in, because we need that for our scenario questions. Kim, I will have them pantomime. I think that much like the practical exam, which isn't always, I don't think, the best test of skills, I'll have my daughter on the floor and I'll have no equipment. I might have I was kind of getting it together. I've got some of the stuff I might bring and say, okay, I'm going to tip a chair over. And you can see the chair. Say, hi, I'm Dan. I'm from the ambulance. I want you to keep your head still. I'm going to have a helper. Just kind of hold your head. What's your name? Margot. Margot. All right. He's just going to hold your head. Not going to hurt you at all, just to make sure it's not hurt. We're going to do an assessment. Can you tell me what day it is today? And that will have to simulate some things. They may not have those things, but I think that we can go through. I think that while it won't totally be motor memory, Kim, we are getting a sequence and order in their mind, and they'll be getting feedback from other students in the class. And I think that that's good. And Sheila, we'll be figuring out Flipgrid together. I think that that is most certainly the case. Wendy's got Google Classroom quizzes and Zoom. I haven't heard quizzes. That's really good. And Lara did say much more room as far as the STEM on quizzes. So this is why we do these things together, to be able to share these things. You know, this was about engaging students in an environment that's new to many of us, certainly new to our students, or certainly we'd like a little bit more time to prepare than we had. Getting together and sharing means a lot. I've jumped in elbow deep myself. I can tell from your comments, a lot of you have as well. Hi, Cliff. Cliff's a good friend from Kansas, and Declan and Jared. Sadly, you tuned in at the end. My people say don't talk forever, and that being an educator, I can talk for no laughing. That I can actually talk for a very long time. This will be available as a recording, so if you just came in and you want to see this, please come back and take a look at it, share it with your friends. I might be getting the hang of these Facebook Live things down, and I hope that the content here was helpful. Let's keep doing these. Let's keep in touch and come by again and continue to work together as we deal with these issues that are facing us as EMS educators in the pandemic. Thanks for coming by.